Hello, everybody. Glad to see our group here tonight for our Wednesday night Bible lecture. I'm Patrick Hayes. For those of you watching this at another time and place, and I'm one of the ministers here at Redeeming Life Ministries Church in Stanton, Virginia. Last week we closed by giving a quick overview of some things that are in Proverbs chapter 9. We're going to start that again and go through the whole chapter with some comments from me. It's not an extremely long chapter. And then we're going to look at another bit of poetry written by, traditionally believed to be written by King Solomon also. And that will be something in the first chapter of Ecclesiastes. So we'll be talking about that. Proverbs chapter 9 is what I call the third wisdom canticle. Now, a canticle is a poem or song, and there are three songs about this imagined person who personifies the abstract quality of wisdom. Solomon calls her Lady Wisdom or Mrs. Hokmah. And I've already talked about the 12 wisdoms. Hokmah is the first, and I call the other 11 wisdoms Mrs. Hokmah's daughters. And you might imagine her, this is fanciful, you might imagine her as the bride of God himself. We read in chapter 8 last week how Lady Wisdom talks about herself, and she says, I was with God in the beginning. I was sharing everything with him. Without me, he didn't make anything. He did all that he did through me. And of course, that's poetic. It's simply saying that God doesn't do anything that he doesn't employ the quality of divine wisdom in doing it. And later, not tonight, we're going to look at a handful of proverbs for each one of those 12 wisdoms to kind of help us to cement them. Chapter 9 is the third song about Lady Wisdom. The first one is found in chapter 1 of Proverbs. The next is chapter 8 of Proverbs, and then this is the third one. And I call this the two dinner invitations. So imagine you receive two invitations to two dinner parties that are going on at the same time. You can't go to both of them and be one person, so you have to make your mind up. Which dinner party are you going to go to? Both of these invitations are addressed to you. Whoso is simple, let him come here. And whoso wanteth understanding, let him come in here. Well, that's you, all right, isn't it? That's me, that's any of us. But both parties are planned for the same evening, and you've got to decide which to attend and which to ignore. Let's look at Mrs. Hokmah's invitation, verse 1 through 3. Wisdom has builded her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has killed her beasts. She has mingled her wine. She has furnished also her table. She has sent forth her maidens, and she cries upon the highest places of the city. Now, I want you to notice those 3 verses. There are 7 things that she does in preparation. This first invitation is from the noble woman, the Lady Hokmah. She offers a feast of meat with fresh bread and spiced wine. Her house is the one that rests on 7 foundations, the 7 pillars. Imagine, you've seen them, these great old antebellum homes that we see, built before the Civil War. There were once these plantation mansions. We see them especially all over the South, if they didn't fall into ruin and decay after the war. And these big columns out in the front. And it was very stylish, if you could afford it, to have all across the front 7 big Ionic columns standing across to signify Lady Wisdom's mansion. So we're familiar with that kind of Greco style of building. Solomon describes her foundations, her pillars, her columns, holding the whole thing up in that way. She plans table conversation covering 7 topics, a 7-course meal of wisdom itself. She has made 7 preparations for your visit. Number 1, the building of the house. Number 2, the carving of the pillars. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. Number 3, the slaughter of the animals for their meat. Number 4, the decanting of the wine. She has mingled her wine. Number 5, the setting of the table. Number 6, the sending forth of her servants to invite guests. And number 7, her personal visit to the important places of the city to invite them to her feast. Now we come to verse 4. This is what the invitation says. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. And as for him that is lacking in understanding, she says to him, come, eat of my bread. All right, let's think about this. She has mingled her wine, and she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine which I have mingled. Again and again, in chapters 1 and 8, the Lady Wisdom has called to the simple, inexperienced young persons who are at the point of making their great life decisions. All persons move from innocent simpleness toward experience in life. The question is, do you have the godly understanding necessary to make right decisions and assessments of your experiences in life? Can you avoid a dangerous experience? Compare Lady Wisdom's call to that of the foolish woman later in verses 16 and 17. We'll get to that in a little while. So in verse 5, she says, I've got bread and I have wine. I've baked my bread. I have mingled the wine. What do you think of when you see bread and wine? Yeah, the communion service. It's a motif that runs throughout the Bible, of course. It is symbolic of the Word and the Spirit, the bread and the wine, Word and Spirit. Now, where did we first see this communion service in the Bible? Way back in Genesis chapter 14, when this mysterious, royal, priestly person, nameless person, we're not told his name. He comes to greet Abraham as Abram is returning from the slaughter of the kings. This royal priestly personage has no name, but he has 3 titles. Melchizedek, King of Righteousness. That's not a name, it's a title. He's also called Melech et Shalom, King of Peace. So he's a double king. He demands righteousness, but he offers peace. And then his 3rd title, he is the priest of the Most High God. And as I'm fond of pointing out, this man is the only man in the Bible who's ever allowed to be both king and priest, or in the Old Testament rather, king and priest. Saul was king, but he tried to be priest one day, and God took the kingdom away from him. Same with Uzziah, one of the better kings, maybe in some ways the greatest king, King Uzziah. in terms of the great list of accomplishments that he performed for the people of Judah during his reign. But in the last year of his reign, he decided to be also a priest, and instantly popped with final stage leprosy all in a moment. His incorruption put on corruption in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, while he was approaching the holy place. And since no person who's ever been a leper can ever be priest, that was God saying, don't think you can be the priest as well, Uzziah. And no leper is allowed in the holy place. So he hastened to get himself out of there. It's an interesting little story, and I could take up the rest of the hour preaching you a sermon about King Uzziah and how and why that happened. But it's an interesting one. Somebody counters to me and they say, well, David was king, but he was also a priest. I said, well, no, he wasn't priest. They said, well, he wore an ephod. Well, that's just a white garment that priests also wear, ephods. I mean, just because I've got a white undershirt on under my clothes, that doesn't mean that, and I'm a preacher, doesn't mean that no one but preachers can wear white undershirts under their clothes. Okay, David wore an ephod, but he also, they say, offered sacrifices to God. You better read those passages very carefully. David always had either Abiathar the high priest or later Zadok the high priest with him. David did not actually offer the sacrifices. As king, he called people to the sacrifices and prayed a welcoming and introductory prayer. Then he stood aside and let the priest take over on those 2 or 3 occasions that we read about. David knew he could not be king and priest. Uzziah died that year for trying to be priest for a day. And Isaiah the prophet says, let me tell you how my ministry really began. This is Isaiah chapter 6. He says, in the year that King Uzziah died. Now Isaiah was a younger man, but he had grown up under Uzziah's reign. He had seen all the great things that Uzziah did. There was none like Uzziah. Up to that time, Uzziah's the only king who ever reigned in Jerusalem without a single rebuke from God. Everything he did was right and wise, and he made no mistakes. In fact, it says that he was marvelously helped by God. Not only that, Uzziah was king for 52 years, longer than any king prior to his time. Not that he was 52 years old, but he was crowned king as a young man, and now he has reigned for 52 years. The only people getting close to that were Saul, David, and Solomon, who reigned for 40 years each. Uzziah surpassed the 40-year limit and added 12 more years to his reign. And there must have been some young people standing around in Jerusalem, young theologians, who come up with all their theories and stuff. They're doing it again now, Jesus is coming this month, 2025, September, because there's a red moon going to show up again somewhere on the planet. They're always coming up with theories, and this means this and that means that. I'm sure they had some messianic theories about Uzziah, including Isaiah as a young man thinking it. There's never been a king without rebuke. He's going into his 52nd year. He must be the king priest that David wrote about in Psalm 110, who would sit on the throne, and his enemies would be his footstool, and a mighty king, and yet he would be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And they must have been associated. This has got to be Uzziah. And if you say, well, no, nobody was calling him the Messiah, I guarantee you they were. These people were looking for a Messiah. And this fellow fit the bill better than any of them. And maybe Uzziah himself heard their prophecies about him. And it got into his head. He said, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I do need to go into the temple and take my position as high priest even for a day. And of course, God struck him with leprosy. Now, that didn't make him evil, but it sure made young prophets like Isaiah think, boy, Uzziah just died. Who then is going to fulfill Psalm 110 and be the king priest? If not Uzziah, then who? This is the greatest man we've ever had. He was greater than David, greater than Solomon. Uzziah, and I lived to know him. If not him, then who? And Isaiah says, it was in the year that King Uzziah died when I had a vision. I saw the Lord on a throne, and his train filled the floor of the building where the throne was. And what building was that? Not the palace, the temple. The year that the man died for trying to be a king in the temple was the year that I saw the only one who could be both king and priest, and it was the Lord himself. A king enthroned in the temple. 200 years after Isaiah, a prophet named Zechariah saw a similar vision, except it's flipped a little bit. Instead of a king enthroned in the temple, Zechariah sees a high priest sitting on the throne of the king in the palace. And it also is the Lord, the branch of Jesse, he calls him. Only the Lord Jesus is both king and priest. Now back to Melchizedek. He brings forth bread and wine. If we read his blessing to Abraham, we determine that it's the bread of kingship and the wine of priesthood. So bread and wine does not just mean word and spirit in our Christian sense, but it meant that both kings and priests were going to descend from Abraham. Now we don't see the bread and wine supper again in the Old Testament, except when Isaac blesses Jacob and he says, may the Lord give you the fat of the earth, that's bread, and the dew of heaven. And then he repeats it, and that means plenty of grain and wine. And that becomes the Melchizedek blessing now repeated by Abraham's son, Isaac. That is borne in mind, bread and wine. Solomon uses it in his poem. Lady Wisdom offers a meal of bread and wine. Come and eat of the bread that I've baked. Come and drink of the wine that I have mingled. Now, if we incorporate the New Testament analogy of word and spirit to that bread and wine that Lady Wisdom is offering, then we see that she offers both the word and the spirit to us. And she makes a meal out of it. And she calls, whosoever is simple, come and eat of this bread and drink of this wine. So it's very interesting that on the night before, just as a couple of hours before he's arrested, Jesus clears off the Passover table dishes and he says, now let's have another little meal. And he brings out the simple Melchizedek meal, bread and wine for his disciples. And he says, this bread is my body, which I give for the life of all men. And this wine represents my blood. Now, of course, we have some church groups who believe in transubstantiation, because Jesus did not say this bread is like my body, and this wine is like my blood. He said this bread is my body, this wine is my blood, and that when he blessed the bread and wine, somehow mystically they actually became his body and his blood. That's the belief in transubstantiation. I was raised taught that belief, but I don't adhere to it. I think that these are symbols of the bread, of the body and blood of Christ, the Word and the Spirit. But it's the Melchizedek blessing, and Jesus says, I want you to do it often and do it in remembrance of me. We have St. Paul discussing it once in 1 Corinthians and then referring to it later, kind of casually. But Christians did it, is the point, and it became a major thing. So that's my talk on bread and wine, verse 5 of this. And so let me read on. I'm just reading from a handbook on the book of Proverbs that I wrote years ago. We'll also see in the Old Testament that Boaz gave both bread and wine to Ruth, not all at the same occasion. David brought bread and wine to Saul and to David's brothers who were with Saul. Jesus ate bread and wine with his disciples, as I've already said. Here, Lady Wisdom is offering the two elements as though for a covenant meal, and she reminds us here of Christ's words to the Laodicean church. Behold, in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Whoso is simple, if any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and sup with him, and he with me. Now that's kind of the opposite. Lady Wisdom has her own house she's inviting the simple into. In Jesus' time, the simple church members are all gathered in a house, but they haven't let him in yet. If just one of you will open the door and let me in, I will sup with him. So Jesus is now making it an individual experience. He wants to have this supper of bread and wine, Word and Spirit, wisdom and understanding with each individual person. I like connecting ideas like that. Now, she's got her guests. They're all simple people, but they've made one good decision. They've taken Lady Nabal's invitation and crumpled it up and dropped it in the street. They've decided to accept Lady Hokmah's invitation. So she's got a table, sat with her guests, and she teaches 7 lessons. Her first lesson, verse 6, forsake the foolish and live. Now don't look at the second statement yet and go in the way of understanding. That's lesson number 2. Her first lesson, forsake the foolish and live. That's the number 1 teaching. You've got, if you're living in Babylon, come out from among her and come into the city of God. You're walking with the world, come away from them and walk in the path, join the path of God's people and wisdom. Come out from among sinners. Throughout the Proverbs, you'll notice if you read it, the whole book of Proverbs carefully, how often Solomon is telling somebody, get away from fools, get away from wicked men. Don't go anywhere with an angry man. Run away from a deceiver. Come out from among them. Forsake the foolish and you'll live. Forsake the wicked man. Forsake the strange woman. These people offer death. You want to live? The first thing you've got to do is change the crowd you're hanging with and find yourself a new crowd. Forsake the foolish. She doesn't yet say what new friends you should get, but you should make sure you have forsaken those that are doing harm to your life. This idea of forsaking people, it's quite interesting. Moses was benefited by the Egyptians for 40 years. He was educated by them. He grew up for 40 years in all of the wisdom and skill and knowledge of the Egyptians. And he became powerful among the Egyptians in word and in deed. That sounds like he was a military man, but also a public speaker, a politician, powerful in word as well as in deed. Moses was great, and the Egyptians made him great. But then the day came when something happened when he was 40 years old. It came into his heart, we're told, to go to his people, the children of Israel, in the land of Goshen. When he did that, he had to say goodbye to the Egyptians. And he refused the title, refused to be called further the son of Pharaoh's daughter. But that's not enough. Not only did he forsake Egypt by faith, he forsook Egypt. We're told in Hebrews 11, he forsook the foolish so he could live. But he spent 40 years now learning to be a shepherd among the Midianites. 40 years with Egypt, 40 years with the Midianites. Okay, that's good. And then God sends him back to Egypt, the people he grew up with, to not only repudiate them, but to destroy their kingdom with 10 plagues. Destroy their might, destroy their power. He didn't want to destroy all of them, but he wanted to break down their kingdom. It's really something. So it's all about who you forsake first. Am I making sense to anyone? Then, after 40 years living with the Midianites, son-in-law of Jethro, who was the high priest of Midian, Moses goes and gets the children of Israel and brings them out into the wilderness. And there's a Midianite prophet by the name of Balaam who gathers Midianite harlot women and sends them in at a place called Baal Peor during the wilderness visits. Sends them in to corrupt the young men of Israel into horrible idolatries. Now this tells us something about Jethro. He was the high priest of Midian, but not of God. His people were Baal worshipers. And because of that, God tells Moses, send Joshua and your army to make war on Midian. And Moses must have said, that's my wife, people. My sons, that's their grandpa's people. You want me to make war on them? I lived among them for 40 years. They were good to me. God says, I want you to make war on them until they are no longer a nation. And they made war on Midian. Balaam was slain during that war with the sword. And God said, Israel will continue to make war upon Midian until they are no longer a nation. And it wasn't until Judge Gideon's time that Midian, the power of Midian, was finally broken. There were still Midianites around, but they were no longer a kingdom or a nation ever again. And so now Moses has had to repudiate and forsake kingly Egypt, and now he's had to repudiate and forsake priestly Midian, his father-in-law, the high priest of Midian. And only if you forsake, so forsake doesn't mean just walk away from, but also repudiate. I'll never go back to that. I'll never go back to this. And what do? Moses has to live with God only, not with any other society or philosophy. In the book of Revelation, we see the 24 elders. And we learn that they are from every nation, kindred, people, and tongue. And they are around the throne. Now, I know some people say 24 of them. That's 12 and 12. So that's the 12 sons of Jacob and the 12 apostles. Well, if that's what it is, then you got some murderers among these 24, and some rapists, and some brother haters, if it's the 12 sons of Jacob. And if it's the 12 original apostles, then you got Judas there. I mean, you can have it that way if that's the way you want to read that passage, except that when these 24 elders begin to worship the Lamb, they say to him, by thy blood you have redeemed us out of every people, kindred, nation, and tongue. Then they say, and you have redeemed us unto our God. But they first praise him for what they were taken out of. Now, if they came from every nation and tongue, then they represent all the peoples of the world that are now redeemed. These are representative. Why are there 24? Because there's 24 time zones around the planet. They are representative of people from all over the earth. That's my thinking about it. But what really gets me is, before you go in the way of understanding, you have to forsake the way of the foolish. You come out of something and repudiate it before you go into something. We like to talk about all these people in the Bible that came into something great with God, but every one of them had to come out of something first. That includes Elijah, that includes David, that includes Saul. Every one, before they could find God, were called to get away from something else. Abraham was told by God, before I'll show you where I want you to go, you've got to forsake the land of your nativity and your family and kindred and all of those places and all of their ways. And after you forsake them all, then I will show you where I will take you to. So when Paul meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, he isn't given everything, but he is sent. I want you to go to the preacher you were coming to kill. Go to Ananias. And, we've got the old Holy Roller song we make from that. Ananias, oh Ananias, tell me what kind of man Jesus is. Oh Ananias, Ananias, tell me what kind of man Jesus is. He healed the sick, he raised the dead. That's what kind of man Jesus is. It just goes on and on and on. But it's all about Paul, Saul of Tarsus, telling Jesus, tell me all about yourself. Nope. I just appeared to tell you to go to Ananias. And he'll tell you all about me. And what Paul learns from Ananias is that he has to forsake and repudiate his own Pharisaic Judaism. And Paul has to go and spend years in the Arabian desert wrestling with this before he is finally able to forsake it. Now, you want to live, there's something you're going to have to forsake. That's the first of the 7 lessons Lady Wisdom teaches. Forsake the foolish. They're all around you. And who are they? They're the ones who wouldn't come to my supper. They're all down the street at the harlot's house having supper with her tonight. But you didn't go with them. Don't hook up with them later. Forsake the foolish and you will live. Lesson number 2, the second pillar of her house. So it is, you have to learn to understand God's purposes for you. Live according to his ways. Make wise and successful persons your teachers and mentors. Go in the way of understanding. Then the third lesson she teaches at supper. I can just see Lady Wisdom standing up and opening up the first and people discussing it. Forsake, it's dinner conversation. And then the second one now, but where do we go once we forsake them? Well, you go in the way of understanding. And now she tinkles her wine glass for attention again. They're all talking about that. And she says, he who reproves a scorner, this is verse 7, will get shame to himself. And he who rebukes a wicked man will get himself a blot. So don't reprove a scorner, lest he will hate you. Now, what does she mean by that? Don't reprove them. Now, later in Proverbs, Solomon will get back to that again. He'll write 2 famous proverbs. He'll say, on one hand, don't admonish or rebuke a fool in his folly. It's like picking up a skunk. You'll end up stinking like him. You'll get into a shouting match and you'll look just as foolish as he is. You'll end up looking like him, and sounding like him. But on the other hand, if you care about him, reprove a fool in his folly, because you might have a chance to win him over. So what Solomon's talking about in those two Proverbs is, on one hand, it might not be wise, but on the other hand, it's loving to try to deal with a fool and appeal to him. But be ready for trouble if you try to deal with a fool at all. Now, Lady Wisdom doesn't put it that way. She just says, if you rebuke a scorner, he's a scorner. He's going to hate you. You know what scorners do? They make sure they're the loudest person in the conversation. They'll shout you down. They'll yell down everyone else. They think that they win an argument through pure volume and the heft of personality. And this scorner is sure going to turn on you and dig up all the dirt about you he can find and fling it all upon you and put you down and try to destroy your influence. You might be a wise person, but if you try to rebuke a scorner, he's going to bite you. And he who rebukes a wicked man will get himself a blot. Once again, you'll end up looking as bad as the wicked man. Why? Well, you're rebuking a sinner for his sin. And he'll go out and say, I'm going to find out about you. And he'll find all kind of stuff from your past. And come back and say, who does he think he is telling me about my wickedness? Let me tell you about his. And he'll make you look like a hypocrite. You'll get a blot. And then he who rebukes a wicked man will get a blot. That's right. So reprove not a scorner, lest he hate you. Not only is it important who becomes your teacher, but it is equally important whom you choose to be your student. So I've got to choose somebody to be over me who will help me in the way of understanding. But I've also got to choose who I'm going to gather around me as my listeners that I can pour into. Are they going to be ready listeners? Jesus was very careful in choosing his disciples. We have this interesting passage in the Gospels. He's got thousands that are following him for loaves and fishes and to see miracles. But Jesus stays up all night praying one night. And the next morning, he chooses his 12 learners, his 12 students. And he says, you're the guys I'm going to pour my teaching into. The rest of the crowds come because they see the miracles I work upon them that are diseased. And then finally, I'm going to feed them free fish sandwiches on a couple of occasions, and they will come not because of the miracles anymore, but just because they want another fish dinner. So I've decided you 12 are the ones who are going to be my students. So it's important whom you choose to be your student. Don't try to instruct persons who don't wish to learn. You can always tell a scorner by the way he reacts to a rebuke or a correction. He not only rejects the counsel, but humiliates, strikes, and hates the counselor. There is no hope for scorners, as we've already seen in Proverbs chapter 1. Now we come to this. If you rebuke a wise man, he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. So you got to find someone who has, and I'm going to use this Hebrew word again, musar, the willingness to be corrected. And he will love you for correcting if he's wise. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will get wiser. Teach a man who is just, he has some tzedek about him, some righteousness about him, and he will increase in lekah, learning, the love of learning. So that's wisdom's third of the 7-course dinner. Is this interesting to any of you here tonight? Now, fourth, she says, you can tell a wise man also by the way he reacts to a rebuke or a correction. Not only will he receive the counsel, but will appreciate your interest in him and love you for it. So here's this one. Pardon me, that was the fourth. This is the fifth. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Everything depends upon your relationship with God. Now, let me just talk about that. How would you define the fear of the Lord? I mentioned this recently in this pulpit. Well, it's awe and respect for God. Yes, but that's not exactly fear. You can look up the word fear, and it means to tremble before Him. It means to be so awestruck that you're terrified. Well, does God want you to always be terrified? Why then is He constantly telling someone, fear not? Rise and be of good cheer in my presence. Be not afraid, little children. And we'll find God saying that to people who are afraid of Him in both the Old and New Testaments. God really doesn't want it. He understands that we can't quite take His awesome majesty. However, He wants us to begin to take it. Moses falls on his face at the burning bush, and well, other people react, terrified at the presence of God. But what becomes the continuing fear of God? It's that we learn a lesson. To fear God is to really fear ourselves if God were to abandon us. To fear ourselves if we can't reach God and can't touch Him. If we, like Cain, fail to merit God's respect. To fear ourselves. So that's the beginning of wisdom. What would I be without Him? And the knowledge of the holy is understanding. So not only meet Him, but get to know Him. The knowledge of God is understanding. The more you know Him, the more you will understand, not only about Himself, but also about yourself. Now here's the sixth one. Wisdom will produce abundance of time and long life in your life. She says, for by me your days will be multiplied and the years of your life will be increased. Now, she hasn't promised silver or gold, but she does promise a full life. And this is what God tells to Solomon when He says, ask what I shall give you. And Solomon says to God, he's a young man, he says, I'm going to ask for one thing. I need wisdom. I need your wisdom if I'm going to rule in my father David's throne. And God says, I am pleased you didn't ask for other things, wealth, health, and the death of your enemies. But because you asked for wisdom, wisdom herself will bring you two of those things. In her right hand is long life and peace. Wisdom herself will cause you to live a long and satisfied life. She'll keep you from dying young. And in her left hand are an abundance of treasures. Wisdom wants to give you those things. And then the seventh lesson, and it is verse 12. Understand the principle of personal responsibility. Let me repeat this. the principle of personal responsibility. You alone make the decision whether to pursue wisdom or follow after folly. No other person can be credited or blamed for your outcome. Remember that all behavior earns rewards or causes results, whether they're good or bad. Here's the way it's put. If you are wise, you'll be wise for yourself. But if you choose to be a scorner, you alone will bear it. Whichever way you go, it's up to you. Now, to me, she's ending her 7 themes by talking about personal choice. You will develop your own outcome. God doesn't say, okay, I've predestined you to go to hell and I've predestined you to go to heaven. I don't think so. God stands back and looks and says, I've offered you wisdom. You come to wisdom's house to eat, or you can go to that other house down the street and eat. It's your decision. Now, if you've decided to become wise, go in the way of wisdom, then there's going to be results for your life. Now, you might, have you ever heard someone teaching that there's this great mystic principle called generational curses? Have you ever heard that? I listened to it over and over till I finally got sick and one day stood up in a group where I was a professor, and I said, I'm going to take that on. A number of you teachers, this was a general meeting, all the student body was there, and I was asked to be the speaker. I said, a number of you have read books, and you're regurgitating those books to some of these students. And it's all about generational curses. Well, you can believe that. I'm not rebuking any of you. I'm just saying I do not believe it. Jeremiah talked about a false proverb in Israel that everybody said, the father has bitten a sour grape and his descendants still have their teeth set on edge because of something their father did. And Jeremiah says, thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not speak of that proverb anymore in Israel. And that's when they were about to be sent off to Babylon. You can't blame things. Well, I can't help it. I got this from my dad. We go through life blaming bad things we do on our parents, our upbringing. Or we go through life, sometimes if we're gracious, saying, well, anything I got good, that's from my dear old mama. But Ezekiel, who was a student of Jeremiah's, picks this theme up. In Babylon, he says, our prophet Jeremiah taught us this. I'm going to pick it back up. Some of you still have that proverb that things that happen in your life are a result of curses that have come upon you from your ancestors. Generational curses. Ezekiel says that's completely wrong. There may be a righteous man who has a son who becomes wicked. There may be a wicked man who has a son who becomes righteous. And he goes all the way through this chapter, giving scenario after scenario. And he says, the father will not be judged according to the wickedness of his son. Neither will a son be judged according to the wickedness of his father. For every one as an individual makes his own choice and stands before God alone. The wicked will not be punished or rewarded because of the goodness of an ancestor, nor will a righteous man be punished because of the wickedness of an ancestor. God said, I do not want those ideas taught again in Israel. Other things I can point out about this, but Lady Wisdom is just now saying it. You, as an individual, choose to be wise and reap the benefits of it. It doesn't mean that everybody else around you is going to be wise. Some of them may not listen to you. If you don't believe me, go back to my 4th lesson. A lot of them won't listen to you. Become wise for yourself. But if you decide to be a scorner over there in that other house, you're going to bear it alone. None of your good friends and their company is going to give any redemption upon you. So it's this idea of personal responsibility for our outcomes. Now that doesn't mean that God won't be gracious enough to help us when we call upon Him. But it does mean that God says, you have to choose this day which one you will serve. Wisdom or folly, God or the devil. Choose ye this day which you will serve. And then the prophet Joel says, you know, everyone, multitudes, everyone stands in that valley of decision. Well, I thought I could go through this quickly and jump into something I want to show you in Ecclesiastes, but I haven't read through this as quickly as I want. We've got verses 13 through 18, and let's read them quickly. On the other hand, there's the supper at Lady Wisdom's house we've been describing, and what she offers. Every course of the supper is accompanied with a teaching. And these teachings are the 7 pillars. Now, the other invitation comes from Mrs. Nabal. That's what I call her. Nabal means foolishness. And, or Miss Nabal. She doesn't even have a husband. She's the same loudmouth who was heard seducing the young fool outside of Solomon's window in Proverbs chapter 7. She's a simpleton herself, and she wants to surround herself with other simpletons. She has a house too, as we've already seen in Proverbs chapter 7, 8 through 27. She drags this young man into her house. Solomon gives us that story. Somehow, probably through bribery, deceit, and extortion, she has acquired a reputable place in the city. Here we have her description. She's a foolish woman. She's clamorous. She's simple. She really doesn't know anything. She sits in the doorway of her house or on a seat in the high places of the city and calls passengers who are going on their ways, interrupting their, and what does she say to them? Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. And as for him that wants understanding, she says to him, same introductory call that Lady Wisdom is making back in verse 4. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. Now, foolishness calls to the same people as Lady Wisdom calls to, and she uses the same wording. The idea here is Solomon has her impersonating Lady Wisdom by using Lady Wisdom's own words. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. But Miss Nabal wants people to believe that she's in the same class as Mrs. Hokmah. But she doesn't have bread that she has baked, nor does she have wine that she has mingled. No sanctioned Melchizedek dinner can she offer. She has stolen waters. Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Now this is metaphor for adultery. No one knows what goes on behind closed doors. And as the old song used to say, the poor fools who are duped by her soon find that she has no table set with fine meats. She has no fresh breads. She has no spiced wines like Mrs. Hokmah has. This foolish woman's house has no table for discussions and learning. The only furniture is a dirty bed and a dusty room. She offers stolen waters and secret bread, phrases of alluring mystery made all the more tempting with the double entendre of sexual overtones. Well, you've got the invitations. Which one are you going to throw away? And which dinner party will you attend? You know that your life will be enriched if you make acquaintance with Mrs. Holkma, but your pulse quickens with strange excitement as you read Mrs. Nabal's proposition. What you don't know is that her house is inhabited by the dead, the ghostly memories of many fallen, and that her former guests are now in hell. The last verse of these 9 chapters of the fatherly discourses lets us in on a chilling fact. He, the young simpleton, knows not that the dead are there and that her guests are in the depths of hell. Here Solomon ends his lecture and dismisses his pupils to make their own decisions. As in many classrooms, there are those who walk out without having heard their teacher's warnings and even go out and laugh about their teacher. He's old-fashioned and can't understand the new generation. Arm in arm, these young students are glad to be let out of class, and they stroll gaily from the school up the street to Mrs. Nabal's house, invitations in hand, breathing heavily with excitement. Others, however, are soon dining at Mrs. Holkma's table, enjoying her stories, marveling at her answers, chuckling at her wit, weeping at her compassion, and taking note of her subtle manner. One young man hasn't made his mind up yet. He stands in the street, still holding both invitations. He must accept one and refuse the other. He is the last to decide. He stares at both houses from his crossroad, and he looks at both of them for a few moments, and abruptly he tears one invitation to shreds and drops the shreds to the street. He approaches his chosen door and knocks, and he will ever be, or all he will ever be, and all he will ever have, and all he will ever accomplish, all of his future echoes in that knock on the door. So who is the young man who knocks at last? Look closely at him. He's you. Which door has he called upon? You tell me. That's the end of my talk about Proverbs chapter 9. Thank you for your attention, and as always, your attendance. God bless you, and good night.